Welcome to the Man RudeDog Show. Rudy, Reyes, Scott Morganroth coming to you with a Monday night preview. We're going to talk about all these other wonderful games that were going on yesterday, as well as what's going on tonight. We're going to preview this. You guys will like it. Love it or leave it. This is Rudy Reyes, Scott Morganroth, Motorman, and RudeDog. Scott, how are you? Thanks for coming back on.
Oh, I'm doing great, Rudy. Glad to be back on with you, buddy. I'll tell you, last night while you were watching football, I had been watching my tire all day, only to find out that I had a nail on the side of my tire that cost me $246 to deal with, but it could have been a whole lot worse, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, it could always be
made
worse.
It back.
Did you have to stick your head out of the window to kind of watch the tire to make sure it didn't deflate, or was that something that was short-lived because it got too cold?
Now that you brought it up, with all this new technology they have, I was able to watch my computer screen on in my vehicle to know what the PSIs were. I never knew much about PSIs as much as I learned about them last night, Rude. You want to talk about utilizing a football analogy. It's like a running guy close to the sidelines, and thankfully I stayed in bounds enough doing a straight line to get back from I-95 north to I-95 south. So very interesting take, I may add, but the wife and I made it back and took care of what we had to take care of.
Well,
our sideline pattern.
It is what it is. And last night, actually in the afternoon, I'm on a different time zone. So for you, yesterday, it was the Foles-Minshew battle. Nick Foles apparently benched for Minshew. Of course, now the mustaches were cool. People can put them back on. I'm sure they're in their back pocket. What happened yesterday? I mean, it was a Foles benching. There was a lot of situations where he wasn't able to get rid of the ball. It was almost as if it was predictable for him under center. What happened? Buccaneers decided to take care of business against Jacksonville and Nick Foles and won 28-11. What's going on?
Rudy, 3 sacks, minus 23 yards, an intentional grounding inside the 10-yard line, and an interception, and you have yourself a handful of headaches is what you have. And obviously, since Nick Foles has been back, you've been very, very ineffective. And Gardner Minshew, the guy that was selected in the 6th round, 178th overall, is a guy that has a lot more mobility, can get out of the pocket, find a lot of his second, third receivers, where Foles is really mainly one-dimensional, throwing the long vertical pass.
I think a lot to be said for what Nick Foles has gone through from an injury standpoint. I mean, he was injured almost the opening possession earlier in the season, first game of the season, and now he finds himself in a situation where you beg the question, where does Nick Foles go? I posted on Twitter earlier in response to that exact situation, benching. What happens with Nick Foles? Does he get traded? Does he go back to Philly? I mean, who takes this historic price tag?
I'll give you a couple of ideas. I don't think he'd go into Tampa because I think the Buccaneers know how limited it is. So that audition probably failed. Philadelphia, I think, would be an ideal spot for him. You know, he was a great backup for Carson Wentz. What about Chicago, though? I think they'd be an interesting possibility if you surround them with Matt Nagy was with him for a couple of years with Kansas City, right? I believe.
Yeah, he was.
So that would be a situation where I can see similarities. But, you know, I think Nick Foles is a good quarterback. I can't say that the Jaguars' offensive line did a whole lot to protect him. And, yes, he is coming out with an injury. You know, who knows? Those are just a few teams that I would see. I'm sure other ones will come out of the woodwork that we don't know about later on.
Well, it's all about cap space, though. I mean, and right now, Philadelphia doesn't have that luxury. And other teams like the Buccaneers also do not have that luxury. As a matter of fact, Chicago is kind of tied up with this whole Trubisky contract as well. I'm not going to state that it's a similar situation as Chicago found themselves in, nor will they probably ever find themselves in moving forward with a Jay Cutler kind of contract with any quarterback moving forward. But yesterday, Jameis Winston on the career, because they were facing the Buccaneers, Jameis Winston has almost as many interceptions as he's had touchdowns. So it kind of it begs the question, where does Tampa Bay go? Do they even look at Nick Foles at all?
Well, if they do, Rudy, the only reason why they would be Bruce Arians is a good offensive coach. He really, really is. Now, again, Bruce Arians, being a good offensive coach, was trying to get Winston turned around, and unfortunately, that hasn't really worked out either. So, I don't know. That one to me is difficult to solve, like the Rubik's Cube, RudeDog. It really is. It's. I'm trying to think of other places that would have a place for him. I mean, if you break down every team, I don't have the list in front. I can go ahead and do it, but that isn't worth that much time. Does Kansas City bring him back as a backup under Andy Reid? I don't know. I think Nick Foles will start somewhere. I just don't see it in Jacksonville.
I don't either. I can actually see, and there's a few places that I think Nick Foles would actually look really good in. And one of those is Indianapolis. They don't have a very reliable backup, and I hate to say that Nick Foles is a backup quarterback, but Indianapolis does have the ends to justify the means of bringing him in, sitting at just under $106,436,000, one of the highest still capped rosters in the NFL. And then obviously New York Jets, would he be a backup there? I think he'd be a solid backup to Sam Darnold. Of course, Sam Darnold doesn't have a Super Bowl ring. Nick Foles does. So again, there's one of those questions. Where does Nick Foles, actually look better in, and what team is he going to do a lot more effective work for under center? Houston Texans, backup Deshaun Watson. Buffalo Bills, backup Josh Allen. Cleveland Browns, you bench Mayfield, put Foles in and see what you get. I don't know. Cleveland's on the downhill spiral. Oakland Raiders, what do they do with Carr? Carr's contract's coming up soon. San Francisco, Seattle to back up Russell Wilson. But here's the problem. Out of all those teams, I think Indianapolis is the best suited, and here's why. Indianapolis.
Say that again. Yeah, go ahead.
Indianapolis has the best pocket passer front line in the NFL, outside of offensive lines like Pittsburgh, who's done some patchwork with Matt Filer, and of course Marquise Pouncey was activated today to come back and play to a game that was actually flexed to be on Sunday Night Football with some type of role reversal. But I actually like that better myself. But in either case, I think he looked better in Indianapolis than he would probably any other team, because they are an offensive line that will allow guys like Jacoby Brissett to be under center, to be able to not get blitzed on, and to have that kind of max protection, and because of the amount of money they have available to them.
All right, well, let me help build your argument a little bit more, okay? Who's the head coach for Indianapolis?
Frank Reich.
Bingo. Thank you, Rudy.
Yep.
Bottom line is that Frank Reich was with Philadelphia when they won the Super Bowl, and who, by the way, started in the postseason. Nick Foles, Frank Reich. You see the connection, RudeDog?
Oh, absolutely. I think that connection's there. But let's keep this in perspective.
Okay.
Guys like Adam Gase, who find himself, and we've talked about this before at length, and I'm not going to dive too much into it, and I'm not trying to shoot the pony, but many times you've seen head coaches come over as this, well, this is a friend of a friend of a friend who's done X, Y, and Z and ABC. Look, Adam Gase, I'm sure, is a fantastic guy, and he's nice, and he's a good quarterback coach. I don't believe that he is by any stretch of the imagination, considering all of his quarterbacks haven't done all that well that have been underneath him. Now, this should not be a good old boy situation at all at any point whatsoever. You bring someone in who's effective. Adam Gase is not. You don't put those types of situations with a head coach who is under 500 as a head coach. Frank Reich has been an over 500 head coach this entire season and last season. So when you look at what's better for Nick Foles, what's better for this Colts franchise, if some reason Jacoby Brissett goes down again, we've seen that earlier in the season, I think Nick Foles would be a great fit there. The relationship is there. If the money is right, if they can afford it, which it appears they can. Now, don't forget, this season's almost over with. It really is. In hindsight being 2020, this season's almost over with. So you're going to have a ton more cap space, a ton more money, and a ton more players available. And in free agency, do the Jaguars talk with Indianapolis to maybe send him packing to another AFC team?
Well, I mean, you got to remember that these two teams face each other twice. So, yeah, do you want to do it within the division? it's not the preferred way to do it, but let's face the reality. If the draft compensation is right, then, for a guy that could be hit or miss, then you certainly keep an open mind, RudeDog.
Well, you definitely have to keep that open. You have to keep that window open. And I think it will be. I think you're going to have that kind of conversation. And it needs to be had. What does Nick Foles mean? Does he mean that much? He sure did when they didn't have a quarterback. They had a quarterback, but he wasn't really a quarterback. I think he was disguising himself as a quarterback. So just who finds themselves in a situation where they're not the quarterback and they're just kind of like the fill-in. They got rid of him. They brought in Nick Foles. He was supposed to be the savior, et cetera, so forth and such. It just has not panned out that way at all. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think it ever will. Just like the quarterback position we're talking about, Jameis Winston, who the Jaguars faced yesterday, doesn't look very good. I look for Jameis Winston and the Buccaneers to separate, as far as I can tell from within the organization, that they're just going to call it a day. And Jameis is just going to be packing and back up someone. Really. He's just going to back up someone because that's really that's all he's worth from that perspective.
Well, let's talk about what you just mentioned a short time ago. Do I see Nick Foles in the Las Vegas Raiders? Yeah, that's very possible. John Gruden has an affinity for quarterbacks, so why not take on Foles if he can come up with some long vertical weapons?
I like it. But speaking of liking things, I think last night's game was something that you probably couldn't turn away from, no matter what the score was, no matter who was playing. But of course, it had to be New England. New England against the Texans yesterday was probably it was on Sunday Night Football. I think it was the AFC game of the week, only from a simple standpoint of you don't know what you're going to get until it's gone. But this game was far from over when the Houston Texans scored early and often in every single quarter. All 4 quarters, they scored 7 points. New England struggled and did not score in the second quarter. That just speaks to that Texans defense. Bill O'Brien has been doing absolute miracles with Deshaun Watson under center. And, of course, a patchwork running back by committee situation early going. I think Houston has a lot to offer in the AFC, especially since they're now leading the division 28-22. I think that there's a way to find a chink in this New England's armor, and here's why. You have a pass rush defense with the Houston Texans. All season long, they've been after quarterback after quarterback after quarterback every single snap and every game. Now, I'm not trying to hype up the Houston Texans, but they have the components. They have the edge rushers. They have the pass rushers. They have solid cornerback play. They've been able to really step it up all season long, and it would not surprise me to see them moving forward and maybe take on the Steelers in maybe even a wild card situation. Steelers are 7-5, and of course the Houston Texans are they're right there in the mix at 8-4. So the Texans defense, 78 for 145, basically first downs. They've just blitzed people on 8 for 6 on fourth down conversions. There's 699 offensive average yards by Deshaun Watson, which is absolutely off the chart with guys like Hopkins, who continues to play absolutely fantastic football, probably the best wide receiver right now in the NFL. And I take nothing away from any other wide receiver to play in the NFL, but Deshaun Watson connecting with DeAndre Hopkins, almost 3,200 yards. The season's not over with. There's still 4 games.
Right.
Carlos Hyde rushing almost 900. DeAndre Hopkins almost 1,000 yards with runners up like Will Fuller, Kenny Stills. This Houston Texans offense is on fire. And defensively, you have leading tacklers like Zach Cunningham, Whitney Merciless, and Deshaun Gibson. Just continues to show up over and over and over again. Now, don't forget, they did acquire Hargraves. Speaking of Tampa Bay, Vernon Hargraves the third, who also had 1 interception since coming over to Houston. Is this Houston team for real? I mean, they were able to beat out New England, and of course Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens did the very same thing. Is this a recipe that other teams will try to follow to show that there are ways to beat New England moving forward?
Well, let's not lose sight of a couple things. I hear that the Texans are not looking to hire a GM for 2020. So what does that tell you, Rudy? Tells you that the current administration that they have going